Like April showers bring the best romance books, in my opinion. Well, hello, reader friends, and welcome back, or welcome for the first time if you are new here. My name is Lori Beth, and welcome to my little corner of the internet where we get into all of the bookish small talk. Happy April to all of you, and happy spring to everyone. I am so excited for this change of season. It is so overdue here where I live, and we are admittedly still a little bit up and down weather-wise, but I can feel the change in the air happening. And I'm not gonna lie, historically speaking, spring has never really been my favorite month, but as I get older, I start to appreciate it more and more. And in my opinion, I feel like the strongest change happens in spring. Things are literally blooming and coming to life, and it gives me so much life that I didn't realize I'd been missing in the deep, dark depths of winter here in the Midwest in the United States. So for today's video, I wanted to do a full-on spring book recommendations, and for these recommendations, I wanted to bring a little bit of everything. So some of these books are gonna have kind of like a spring theme, if you will, and some of them just represent that change of season or that coming to life through either the storyline or the characters, because I feel like any of those things can really represent spring as a season itself. So I grabbed a stack of books that I feel like represents spring or that change of season in one way or another. I think I'm going to do this video today by genre. So we're going to start with our smallest genre and then work through the larger genre. And we're going to just talk about all of the books that I think are perfect for your spring reading. So of course, we do have quite a few books to go over, and we are going to jump right in. All right, first genre up on our list is the romance genre. And what a great genre to read in the spring. You know what I mean? Like, what a beautiful time to kind of bloom and fall in love. And not just that, read some romance books that have almost like a spring theme to them, or just kind of like a changing of characters and things happening in the book. So first up on my list is Funny Story by Emily Henry, because how could I not talk about this book one more time? Because in all honesty, it just took my breath away, and it might be, to this point in time, my favorite Emily Henry that I have ever read. So in this story, we follow a main character named Daphne who uproots her life and moves to Michigan, where I just so happen to live, to be with her fiance and start a new life there. Once they get there, things kind of fall apart at the seams because her fiance leaves her for his best friend, and she's left without a place to go, doesn't really know what to do because she's in this completely new town. So she moves in with her ex-fiance's new girlfriend's ex-boyfriend. Yes, you heard that right. It is kind of a hot mess, literally from the beginning of the story, but more than that, it's about someone who really has to learn how to stand on their own 2 feet in an environment that they know nothing about, where they're completely on their own and uncomfortable and really forced to just be their own person for the first time in their lives. So not only were the tropes in this book just super fun and kind of like chaotic right from the get-go, the characters were so relatable and so genuine that you couldn't help but root for them the whole time, including the male main character. And not to mention, this does take place in my favorite city in the state that I live in, and it really dives into the environment and the atmosphere and what that city feels like. They are surrounded by one of the Great Lakes in Michigan, and that atmosphere, if you have never experienced it, just gives you like a sense of life, nature, and I don't know, in the storyline, it goes so much into the things that they are surrounded by and how they live their lives in this city based on the elements that are around them. And to me, it just gives off such a spring vibe, such a coming to life story. And I highly recommend this if you love a impeccable atmosphere in your book. Next up in our romance category is Weather Girl by Rachel Lynn Solomon, because how could I not include this adorable book on this list? And another romance author that I feel is so underrated. Like, I don't think a lot of people talk enough about Rachel Lynn Solomon, but I love her stories. And in this one specifically, we follow a main character who lives in the Pacific Northwest, so on the opposite side of the country from where I live, but it is also full of atmosphere. And she has her whole life wanted to be a weather girl, as you might have guessed it. So it is a typical romance story full of romance tropes, and this woman kind of like fighting for her spot in this working world. And it is also heavily based on the atmosphere and where these characters live. And not to mention, the main character absolutely loves the rain. And what screams spring more than rain? Am I right? Like, April showers bring the best romance books, in my opinion. And again, Rachel Lynn Solomon is such a brilliant romance writer. I love her characters in her books. She is from the Pacific Northwest, so you can really feel that come through in her stories when she is like immersing you in the atmosphere of these books. And her characters are just very relatable and always dealing with such a real life problem that it's almost hard not to relate yourself to them. And if you looked at the cover of this book and you didn't think spring, then I might just be a crazy person. All right, so moving on to our next genre, which is our fiction genre. And the very first book up on our list, which, speaking of rain, is Hurricane Girl by Marcy Dermansky. This little book truly took me by surprise, and I was kind of mind blown by Marcy Dermansky's writing. So I'll read the back of the book for this one just so I can give you a clear idea of this storyline. Allison Brody, fleeing her movie producer boyfriend, empties her bank account to buy a house on the beach. But when a hurricane makes landfall and scatters her home up and down the shore, Allison finds herself adrift. Should she go home from the bar with the strange cameraman and stay in his guest room? Is that a glass vase he smashed over her skull? Can she wipe the blood from her eyes, get in her car, and drive to her mother's? Does she really love the brain surgeon who saved her, or is she just using him for his swimming pool? And is it possible ever to truly heal without seeking some measure of revenge? A gripping, provocative novel that walks a knife's edge between comedy and horror, Hurricane Girl is the work of a singular talent, a novelist unafraid to explore the intersection of love, sex, violence, and freedom, while celebrating the true joy that can be found in a great swim and a good turkey sandwich. I mean, so much happening in this book, and it didn't disappoint me at all. In fact, I thought it was truly a perfect blend of kind of some heavy topics. So not only a woman, again, breaking out on her own, standing on her own 2 feet, but the weather completely wiping her slate clean, like literally, and her having to figure everything out. And along her journey, as her life is completely turned upside down, some of these kind of horrific things happen to her, and she just goes on autopilot to try to get from point A to point B. It's a little bit unhinged, so if you do like a chaotic, unhinged female main character, this would probably be right up your alley. But also watching this woman just kind of try to get a handle and a grip on life and finally start to accept the things that have happened to her was a true blossom of a human being. So this just kind of gives me spring vibes, not only because of the weather, but because of what our main character goes through in this story. And from there, we have Blue Sisters by Coco Mellors. I don't actually really know how to pronounce her last name, but what an amazing author this woman is. So I got this book as an ARC last year, and I had not read anything by this author before. I had seen Cleopatra and Frankenstein at the store, and I honestly meant to keep grabbing it because it sounded really phenomenal, and I've yet to read it, but it is on my list because I read this book and loved this author so much. And in this story specifically, we follow a group of sisters that have lost one of their other sisters, and it kind of follows their story together and then also individually about how they are kind of coping with the loss of a sibling and how that has affected each one of them individually, but also them together as a group. So the main idea behind this book is following these characters go through this very dark season of their lives and kind of finally spring and bloom into the rest of their lives after dealing with this traumatic event. I thought it was absolutely phenomenal. And if you like a family drama story or stories about family dynamics, this one is very gripping and I highly recommend. I cannot wait to read more books by her. And from there, we have Sweet Bean Paste by Durian Sakagawa. And first and foremost, before we get into the book, let's take a look at this cover. And you can kind of gauge why this might even be on the list for spring book recs. So let's read this one together as well. Sentaro has failed. He has a criminal record, drinks too much, and his dream of becoming a writer is just a distant memory. With only the blossoming of the cherry trees to mark the passing of time, he spends his days in a tiny confectionery shop selling dorayaki, a type of pancake filled with sweet bean paste. Until, that is, Toku comes into his life. An elderly woman with disfigured hands and a troubled past, she makes the best sweet bean paste Sentaro has ever tasted. The unlikeliest of friendships blossoms, but it will take all of their resolve and plenty of pancakes to protect themselves when Toku's dark secrets come to light. In the synopsis of this story, it is mentioned how our main character marks time, the passing of time, by the blossom of the cherry trees. And I have never personally seen the cherry trees myself, but I know that in spring when the cherry blossoms come in, it is supposed to be absolutely phenomenal. And it is kind of like a sense of rebirth or just restarting the year fresh every time like a bloom or a blossom like that comes in. So the main character of the story has always been kind of like in a dark cycle, and the only thing that really brings him life or joy is when he starts to see the seasons change and he knows that another year has gone by. And finally, he meets this other character that comes into the story who really just changes him, makes him open his eyes to life throughout the entire year and all of the days that are passing, and another friendship blossoms from two unlikely characters, and they learn so much from each other that it is such a heartwarming story. So if you like a very solid fiction novel that gives you that feeling, like that heartwarming feeling, characters kind of learning life lessons and building friendships and sticking up for each other, this was such a fantastic story, and I can't recommend this enough. All right, so moving on to our last and final genre of the video, and that is the fantasy genre, because you know that I have to keep the fantasy genre for last because it will always be the biggest genre on my list. Who would have thought that? But first up on our list is, I'm going to say, the Emily Wilde's series. This is book 2. I don't have a physical copy of book 1, and I have not grabbed the third book yet, but the third book did just come out to wrap up this series, and what a fantastic series for a change of seasons. Not just, again, because the characters grow and develop so much throughout the storyline, just the atmosphere and the environment that they are in. So in this series, we follow a main character named Emily Wilde who spends her time documenting different types of fairies throughout the world. She is compiling an encyclopedia of fairies. So along the way on her journey as she is doing this, she is thrown into all different types of atmospheres. She's constantly surrounded by all like these little fairy towns and realms that include so much foliage and rivers and trees, and it just gives you that kind of delicious vibe of like being in a meadow somewhere surrounded by flowers and like cute little fairies, which is honestly like my dream come true. This is such a fun series to read, especially if you like leaning into the more like fairy tale side of fantasy. And it does have like a really cute slow burn romance between the two main characters. So if you have not picked up this series yet, now is your chance. Book 3 just came out and you can read them all back to back to back. And next up we have Under the Whispering Door by TJ Klune, which is honestly an author that I have not read too much from. I think this is the one and only book I have read by TJ Klune, but I loved it. Loved it so much. I found it so cute and heartwarming and charming and like all of those things that you can think to describe a book, basically like a very cute fantasy novel, if you will. But let's read what this one is about together. So when a reaper comes to collect Wallace from his own funeral, Wallace begins to suspect he might be dead. And when Hugo, the owner of a peculiar tea shop, promises to help him cross over, Wallace decides he's definitely dead. But even in death, he's not ready to abandon the life he barely lived. So when Wallace is given 1 week to cross over, he sets about living a lifetime in 7 days. Hilarious, haunting, and kind, Under the Whispering Door is an uplifting story about a life spent at the office and a death spent building a home. I mean, does that not just like tug at your heartstrings? But I truly loved the storyline of this so much, and that main character that you kind of almost dislike in the beginning of a book. Like, he's kind of obnoxious. He's lived this life where it's like work, 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 no play, and then boom, suddenly he's dead, and he doesn't even have the chance to try to do any of that anymore. So he spends this time like in this in-between before he crosses over to try to finally find peace and happiness. And he does that with the other characters in the book, and it just makes for such a beautiful transformation of a character and his thoughts about life in general. It was very heartwarming and kind of tugged at my heartstrings the whole time. And if you like fantasy-based, not like, this is not like a romantasy book where you're gonna get like high fae and stuff like that. No, this is just like a very charming fantasy novel about someone who is a ghost finally finding happiness and almost being reborn again, even though they're dead. But it was truly a beautiful story, and I don't know what says spring more than like that rebirth and that coming to life, even if you are technically dead. I don't know. It was just very cute. Really, really loved it. And from there, we have A Botanical Daughter by Noah Medlock. And let's also take a moment for the cover of this book because, oh my. Definitely another book that I bought based on the cover alone, but the synopsis on the back definitely didn't disappoint. It is an unusual thing to live in a botanical garden, but Simon and Gregor are an unusual pair of gentlemen. Hidden away from the disapproving tattle of Victorian London, they are free to follow their own interests without interference. For Simon, this means working his taxidermical art. Gregor's business is exotic plants, lucrative but harmless enough, until his latest acquisition, a strange fungus which shows signs of intellect beyond any plant he's seen, inspires him to attempt a masterwork, true intelligent life from plant matter. Driven by the glory he'll earn from the Royal Horticultural Society for such an achievement, Gregor ignores the flaws in his plan, that intelligence cannot be controlled, that plants cannot be reasoned with, and that the only way his plant beast will flourish is if he uses a recently deceased corpse for the substrate. So, as you can hear from the synopsis, it's not just a fantasy book. It's a little bit more of like that magical realism / horror. I would say it's kind of like on the horror side. I would describe this as kind of like a Frankenstein, but with plants, which was such a cool premise and kind of something I don't believe I've ever really read before. So not only do you have this couple that kind of lives a secluded life because of the time period that they live in, and it not being maybe super accepting of the way that they live their lives, they start to dabble in this idea of recreating life with like a sentient fungus, which I guess like fungus is living. So maybe that's not the best way to say that, but you get the idea. Basically, they use this fungus to bring back a dead corpse and create a plant daughter, a botanical daughter, if you will. It is kind of weird, a little grotesque in the sense of like, reanimation of life. I don't know if you can truly find anything that is more spring-like than the actual recreation of life from plants in a story. Absolutely wild. Loved the premise of this book. Super gripping. So if you are a fan of horror in general and you like stories like that, like if you really like a Frankenstein lover, this was a really interesting take on a story like that. Absolutely loved it. And last but not least, on our list of spring book recommendations is Daughter of the Moon Goddess by Sue Lynn Tan, the book that I have talked about so many times at this point, but I just couldn't help but put it on this list because, again, look at this. Look at stunning, beautiful. We love a beautiful cover, and more than that, we love a beautiful story. And in this story, our main character, Xingyin, is the daughter of the moon goddess. So shortly into the story, she finds out that her mother is dealing with some things she was not aware of growing up, and she has to flee her home, and she falls down into the celestial kingdom, and here she has to learn how to fit in with the people and kind of find her way in this world until she can get back to her mother. This story is heavily based on Chinese mythology, and with that, it brings such a stunning atmosphere. So not only do you get the story of this main character who kind of ends up being a badass by the end of the book, but the environment that she falls into, and you can kind of just feel yourself there from the way that the author describes their setting in all of the places that they move throughout the story. So if you like a mythology-based fantasy, honey, do not sleep on this book. Please run to the bookstore and pick this up. And not to mention, it's a duology. So there is a second book to this, but ooh, is there anything I love in this world more than a duology? I've yet to find it. So a beautiful, beautiful story, beautiful atmosphere, and perfect for that changing of season coming into the beautiful blooming spring vibe. All right, my friends, well, there you have it. Those are all of my spring book recommendations. And of course, I would love to know if you have read any of the books that we talked about in today's video, or if you have any good spring book recommendations that I could add to my list, because I'm not gonna lie, as time goes on, I truly love this season more and more, and I would love some more books that really fit that vibe right now. As always, if you liked this video, go ahead and hit that thumbs up button because it always helps the girl out. And if you want to make sure you don't miss any of my other upcoming videos, go ahead and hit that subscribe button too. And of course, it has been an absolute blast, and I can't wait to see you guys in the next one.